Yeah, I'm glad to be here. How's it going?
Welcome to Days of the Dead. So happy to have you here.
Yeah, this is fun.
I'm glad. Okay, so first things first, I would love to know a little bit more about you personally. You are an actor, a writer, a director, and everything in between. How did this begin for you?
Well, I'm an only child, which probably explains a lot of that. And I just really love movies.
Yeah.
And I grew up where no one really encouraged you to make movies because it wasn't something that like some other people in Hollywood did. But then also in the 90s when I was a teenager was like the real independent film boom in the States. And so for me that was inspiring because I was seeing all these like the young filmmakers making these sort of like non-Hollywood, outside the system movies that were becoming very cool. And so that was sort of inspiring. So the idea of making a movie suddenly seemed possible. We didn't really have the technology like you do today where anyone has a phone that they can make a movie with. So it was still seemingly like complicated to do it, but the idea that you can make something outside of the industry was doable. And so I thought, okay, well maybe if I make something, I didn't do very well in school, so I was like, I better make a cool short film to help me get into school, and then, you know, I moved to New York when I was 18. And really the answer to your question is, I moved to New York, I was going to film school, and the teacher I had my first semester, her name was Kelly Reichardt, who's going on now to make a whole bunch of very lauded films. But at the time, she'd only made one movie, and the guy that produced her movie had made a movie called Habit, which was this vampire movie that I had seen. And so, there you go. And so, we are the ones who have seen it. And so that was like in the class. It was just me and you guys. That was it. No one knew. But so she was like, I'll bring him in to talk to everybody. And she just didn't do it. And I kept bugging her, when are you going to bring Larry? Larry's his name. And she was like, you know what? Nobody cares. Here's his phone number. And so I met him, and I became friends with him. And he watched my short films. And then when I graduated school, he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, move to LA, write a script, whatever you're supposed to do to make movies.
Right.
And he was like, well, I'm thinking about producing some movies. If the only thing stopping you is money, what if I gave you a little bit of money? And I was like, well, I already have a script, which was not true. But I was like, well, just give me the weekend to polish it up because I didn't know I'd be showing it to anyone. And so I went home and wrote it that weekend. And I gave it to him, and he was like, okay, well, let's see if we can get it made. And that was in whatever year that was, May. And then in October, we were making that movie, and it was called The Roost, and that movie went to South by Southwest Film Festival, and then that was kind of the snowball started rolling from there, and now here I am at Days of the Dead.
Okay, so I'm going to start talking to you about some of your older stuff that I love, because I've been a fan for quite some time. So I'm going to fangirl a little bit if I could. Can we please talk about The Innkeepers?
Sure.
I love The Innkeepers. How did that come to you?
That happened because I had made a movie called House of the Devil, and we made that movie in Connecticut, because at the time, Connecticut had a very good tax incentive, so it was like filmmaking was on sale in Connecticut. So we went there and we found this groovy house, and the hotel that we stayed in was about a 30-minute drive from the house. And it was this quirky old hotel from the 1800s that had kind of bad 70s renovations. And it was very charming, and the whole crew was staying there. And the guy that worked at the front desk had a ghost hunting website because the place is allegedly haunted and all this. And so we were making this movie, and we were shooting nights mostly. And then we would come back, and we were all in our 20s, so like everyone on the weekends was always getting drunk and all this stuff. So we'd have all these weird experiences in this strange hotel in the middle of nowhere in Connecticut. And it just really stuck with me. So when we finished House of the Devil, I wanted to make a ghost story, and I was like, well, we just sort of lived one when we made House of the Devil. So I wrote it being like, I know that this place exists. So as a way to make an affordable movie, if I write, they go into this room and it looks like this, we don't have to do anything because it's already there. And so much so that although I did write it without asking, and if the Yankee Peddler, which is the name of the hotel, had said no, then that script would have just gone up in flames because it was so specific to that place. And so when we went back, actually the crew that came to make that movie was like, this is weirdly exactly like the script. And it was like, well, yeah, because I lived here basically. So it was a weird kind of personal thing of just having spent time at that hotel, and then we went back there and made a movie.
I love it, yeah.
You still go there today if you want to.
I rented that one on accident from the library out here. I live in Chicago, and we get free movie rentals at the library, right? And so I'm like, oh, what's this? It's horror. I'll watch it. When it first came out, and I was like, this is really indie and really awesome, and I need to know more about this hotel and this director and everything about it. And then I went on to House of the Devil, and then from then on and then on. So what were some of the most strange occurrences when filming House of the Devil?
And they happen on The Innkeepers also. I am not a huge believer. I'm very skeptic. Although I would say staying at the Yankee Peddler is as close as I've ever come to believing. Weird stuff would happen like, the easiest thing I can say is it just feels like somebody's in the room with you. And like, here's an odd thing is when I wrote the movie, we picked a room to be like the haunted room in the movie.
Yeah.
And I don't know, whatever it was, 353, whatever it was.
Every hotel has one, right?
And I picked that room purely for technical reasons because it was a bigger room, and it was a bigger room so the dolly could fit in there and we could do a better shot. And it's the only reason I picked it is because it's a bigger room, easier to work in, and it's like going to look better for the movie. By some coincidence, that is the most haunted room. That is the one where all the stuff. No one told me that until afterwards, and they were like, "Oh, I thought you picked that room because that's the room that has all the history of being haunted." I was like, "No, I only picked it because it was big." But that's like notch that in a weird thing that happened.
Yeah.
Sometimes the phone would ring in your room, but in that hotel, you have to call the front. The phones are not connected to the outside; they're connected to the front desk. So if
That's
the phone
like
rings, it's the front desk calling you. So sometimes it'd ring and there'd be nobody there, and it'd be like, "Well, who?" But maybe somebody was just picking a prank. I don't know. But it does feel like. And then the thing that would happen to me, and would happen to almost everyone on the cruise, you had these really weird, vivid dreams. And so it was just a very strange, kooky place, and it might be haunted.
Is it still open now? I can't remember.
As far as I know, post-COVID, I'm not sure.
Right.
Yeah, I think it is, but it certainly was before COVID. Yeah.
So we need to all just take a field trip to the
Yeah,
Young Shepherd.
Torrington, Connecticut.
Right? Amazing. Acting-wise, you played Tariq in your next. Can we? Oh yes, we got some people. I love that one as well. That's a movie about a badass woman and a bunch of men who get what they deserve.
Sure.
No offense. Tell me about that.
That was a weird thing where, so Adam, who was a buddy of mine, was making that movie, and he was just sort of weirdly casting all of our friends. And
Yeah.
so he had cast Amy Simons, who was a good friend of mine. He had cast AJ Bowen, who was a friend who had been in House of the Devil, and he cast Joe Swanberg, who's from here. And they asked me to do it, and I was like, I'm not really an actor like you. I don't want to ruin your movie. Like, just get a real actor. And then they didn't go away, and they asked again, and I was like, really though? I don't. And they were like, no, it's fine. And then they told me who's in it, and I was like, all right, if that's what we're doing, if it's everybody that I know, like we'll figure it out. And so then we went there, and I think had it not been everybody I know, I don't think I would have done it because I don't have a real desire to be an actor, and it's not something that I feel confident in doing. But it was fun to do with everybody, and it ended up being just sort of Joe and I making fun of ourselves and the sort of world that we were in as far as making like indie movies and going to film festivals and things like that. So it ended up being really fun, and it's been a really enjoyable movie to be a part of. And oftentimes people say like, "Oh, yeah, you got shot with the arrow." Like, you're right. That was me. That is what happened. Yeah.
Well, you were fantastic as an actor. I never would have thunk that.
Okay.
What were some of the biggest challenges in stepping into that acting role, like as actor?
Well, I just don't have a desire to do it, so therefore it's awkward for me because it's not something. Usually, people that want to be a performer sort of enjoy the attention of it and they enjoy the performance of it. I'm very self-conscious of it, which is sort of what you don't want to be as an actor. Like, you never want to be self-conscious. So for me, it's like not because it's not something I want to do. The habit that is happening to me is the most anti-acting thing you should be doing. So I'm very aware of, like, I can hear myself saying these lines and I sound insane. Like, it's just not something that I want to do. So it was helpful because I knew everybody in it. We could kind of improvise our way through it and play sort of a characterization version of ourselves, or certainly in my case, myself. That made it easier. Like, I had done some movies where I acted with Joe as well, which is also a little bit of like a lampooned version of myself, which is, that's not that hard to do, but anything beyond that is just something that I'm like too self-aware or too insecure about doing. So, but I'm happy to have been in that movie, and I'm happy to have been in Joe's movies, and they were fun, but I don't want to do that again.
It was a fantastic performance, so
Yeah.
you shouldn't be self-conscious.
I'm in and out. I got, my legacy is secured.
Okay. I'm going to fangirl about one more thing, and then we'll throw it out to our audience. Cabin Fever 2. Ew.
That's a good review. Yeah.
That is disgusting and brilliant, by the way, along with Cabin Fever 1, of course. Tell me about some of the challenges of filming such an effects-heavy movie, as well as coming after an amazing film.
Well, I had known Eli, and he suggested that I do it, and sort of my take on it was to do a very super gross, like teenage version of what would be like a virusy body horror, sort of STD kind of adjacent thing, and just to make something really gross. And that was the goal. But in kind of a John Waters-y, Todd Solondz kind of 90s way. And so that's kind of what we set out to do. And so it was very effects heavy, was what we were doing. So that was kind of the project every day, is kind of really pushing it in that regard. And it ended up being like a troubled production on the others, like in Supposed to whatever. But the experience of making that movie was really terrific, and it was really fun to do that. I have not seen it since it, I mean, I don't even know, since it came out. And but I remember a lot of the gross things that we did. And a lot of the people, production designer of that, DP of that, special effects makeup people, like I still work with all of them today. And so it was, even Joe Smart came and he was there and he was in it for a little bit and he shot behind the scenes. So it was a really, really fun experience making the movie. But then the post-production of it was a very difficult experience, and then I went off to make House of the Devil. And so it's an amusing thing to hear about, because I'm far enough away from it now that I'm like, I wonder how gross that movie is. It would be funny to watch it now.
It's pretty disgusting.
I'm sure it is, yes.
What was one of the most challenging effects in that you had to tackle?
I remember the prom thing was just so much blood. It was so much blood that we actually turned the water supply pink, and it was like a problem in North Carolina, because we had 250 gallons of blood. Because to cover the entire gymnasium floor ankle deep with blood, it turns out it takes 250 gallons of blood. It's not like getting 250 gallons of fake blood is like not a, like, how would you even begin to do that? So we had all these like 55-gallon drums. It was a really strange thing. So much so we finished, that was the last thing we shot, and we wrapped, and I remember Ozzy, who was the makeup effects guy, they like Gatorade coolered the blood onto me, and it like went over my head, and it went like through me. Like the money in my wallet was red. Like that's how much like blood like went onto me from that. And so ever since then, whenever we do a movie, I'm like, don't do that again. And they're like, no. They're like, that was a rare thing, because it was like, it wasn't funny.
You
like,
were
it was
worried
funny
it
for
would
one
become
second.
tradition.
No, like I was like, went to take a shower and was like, this isn't gonna work. Like the shower's not gonna make this go away. It was really
and your shower looked like a crime scene.
I mean, it was crazy. It was really, but it was fun. Yeah,
Okay.
it was a good time, yeah.
Audience questions. We'll start with you.
You said that made the water pink. Was that the groundwater?
Yeah.
Into the groundwater?
It went into, there was so much that went into what I presume would mostly be the drains, where they hosed it out. So it went into something, and it did, yes. And it was a thing, like it's a small town. The town, it's been so long now, but there was a thing where we got a memo that was like, there's something wrong with the water. And it's like, well, it's not really, but it was a lot of food done.
So my real question is,
Yeah.
what's it like to work with Mia Goth and Sophie Thatcher? And how are they similar? I really like both, but especially Sophie. She's come along.
Yeah, yes. What's it like to work with Mia Goth and Sophie Thatcher? They're different. They're both great. You know, Mia and I making these movies had like a really unique experience, because it went from, you know, casting someone that I was a fan of, who we got along very well, and we connected on X, and we had this cool idea for a movie, to then into this strange trilogy that is sort of really fork in the road, probably both of our lives in a way. So that's hard to explain and hard to compare to anything, because it's like that's a once in a career type thing that happened. But it was great. I mean, like I think, challenged each other and made each other better and made the movies better for it. And she's like a real fearless, like dedicated person. And so she's awesome, and all of the, you know, I think success or fandom that she has is well deserved for the obvious reasons. I mean, so she's great. And then Sophie, I had seen in a few things, and what was cool about making Maxine is there was all these like little parts, and that was kind of the vibe of the movie. And so it was cool to be able to go out to people who I was a fan of, and I was like, you know, this is a small thing, but it would be great to have somebody really cool do it. And because of Mia being so great in the other two movies, it really kind of made people want to do something like this. And so I think she had a break from Yellow Jackets and came out and did it. So it was great, and she's awesome. So, but both of them would be a pleasure to work with again.
You guys get a chance to watch Prospect. I think that's Sophie Thatcher's first film.
Okay, I don't know if I have seen that. The sci-fi one, I know the one you're talking about, yes. Yeah.
So you kind of answered the first part, I think. So when you went into creating X, you didn't necessarily have this whole Pearl Maxine trilogy in your head, right? It was kind of an evolution of working with Mia. And then with doing that, though, I'm wondering now, was it fully intentional to create really 3 sub-genre type of films in each one of those, or did it just kind of happen in the process?
Like basically no and yes. So basically no, I had written X and it was just one movie. And then it wasn't so much Mia that spawned the trilogy, it was like the pandemic. And so what happened was we were going to go make X, and we had to make it in New Zealand because it was the only place on Earth with no COVID. And I felt like to go all the way to New Zealand to get all these work visas and spend all this money creating Texas and New Zealand and be one of the only film productions on Earth shooting, to then just tear all that down and go home seemed so foolish and such a missed opportunity and so wasteful that I was like, we have to figure out how to maximize our time there. And with all the people making movies, and who knows if we'll ever make movies again, how do we make more movies? And so that made me think of the idea for Pearl, because I was like, we can't make a sequel because, spoiler to anyone who hasn't seen X, at the end of that movie, everyone's pretty much dead. So you couldn't really make another movie on that farm. So the idea of amortizing the cost of having built the farm has no value in a sequel. But in a prequel, it's a lot cheaper to paint a barn than it is to build a barn, and so on and so forth. So I was like, okay, the second movie would be cheaper, which is going to be appealing to the studio. Weirdly enough, because Mia was already playing older Pearl, she's the same actor if we do a prequel. So that's interesting, and that's a way to tell the story of how that character came to be. And we can keep the same crew, we can do all these things. And 60 years prior, which would time out mostly to Mia's age compared to the Pearl's age, was 1918, which was a similar event that was going on to the entire world at the time. And I was like, okay, so that makes there be an in for everybody in the world. That's kind of interesting and coincidental. And so all of that swirled around to be like, okay, what would her origin story be? So I kind of had the idea for that. But then I told A24, and they were intrigued by it, but they weren't really convinced. But then I was like, well, I need to convince Mia to do it, because if she doesn't want to do it, there's no movie. So that was very easy. I asked her if she wanted to do it. She was very excited about doing it. And so I was like, well, since you're playing older Pearl, we should really do this together, because it should be something that we collaborate on, because there is no movie without you, because you're about to embody this character, and if I'm going to write this other movie, we should do it together. So she was game for all that. And then we told basically A24, I was like, look, if I can prove to you that we can do this movie for cheaper, and we can do it back to back with the same crew, and I can write a script in the 2-week quarantine trying to get into the country, if you greenlight it before X, then we can make them back to back, and it's very affordable. I don't think they believe me. I think they kind of were like, yeah, that's great. And so I went to New Zealand, and I would FaceTime with Mia, and we would talk about the movie, and cranked out a script, and then sent it to A24, and they were like, actually, maybe we'll do this. And that was like the first week of November. And then by Christmas, they had greenlit it. And so then we made them back to back. And so, so we made those two back to back. And I jokingly was like, and then we should make this big 80s movie for the third one. And they were like, well, why don't we just make that one and skip Pearl? I was like, no, because you'll never make Pearl if that's the case. You got to go backwards before you can go forwards. And so they were cool with that. And then I wrote Maxine while finishing Pearl. So that way, when Pearl was released, I'd have a script to then go right into Maxine. So it was a very hectic couple of years. But no, so it was not a plan to do it. It just evolved into a plan. And then the yes part of your question is, as soon as I knew that these were a possibility, because X was such a movie about filmmaking and about how filmmaking affects these characters, and this era of filmmaking is sort of defining who they are and all that, to do that again in Pearl would be boring. So it was like, okay, well, what kind of filmmaking would be like an X? It's this sort of DIY, independent, we don't need Hollywood, we can do it ourselves, we're gonna be famous ourselves. That doesn't really relate to Pearl's character. So Pearl was more sort of like a hopeful, dreaming kind of person, and sort of the magic and the wonder of the movies was much more alluring to her. So I was like, this should be a more traditional, like the classic Hollywood type thing. And then going into Maxine, knowing that she's finally made it to Hollywood in the 80s, I was like, this should feel like the sort of 80s straight-to-video movies, because that's the world that she's in. And that also just speaks to the overall theme of the movies and how like different eras of cinema are affected.
Yeah.
So, how cool was it to crush Kevin Bacon like a bug? And can you talk about that scene, any difficulties or complexities to shoot that?
Yeah, that was very fun. Kevin was a real good sport about it. He was, I wrote that in the script. I was very excited about that scene, and then when you actually have to go do it, you're like, do they even make these things anymore? And so, weirdly enough, though, the one that we used was like 2 minutes from our production office, which is so random. We couldn't find one anywhere in the city, and then it was like, a stone's throw away. And it was very cool the first day we went there to see it work, because it does exactly what you think it would do. And it was a project because, everyone in movies are not as like loose as they used to be. Like it's a very kind of corporate kind of environment now. So the idea of doing that and doing it without like CGI or anything like that is challenging to a modern crew at times, because people are like, why would we ever do anything like this? And it's like, I don't know, it'd be better. And so first we had to find 2 of those Cadillacs that we could squish. And then when we were making it, they had to rig the machine so that there wasn't so much they could do, but basically it was like, okay, he can get in there if we unplug it. And then everyone starts to be like, but what if the hydraulics fail and it suddenly falls? And it's like, I don't know why that would happen. So then we had to sort of build a thing that if that happened, there would be a catch-all thing for that. So it was like a kind of a really annoying, ongoing process for the best. We didn't want to actually crush Kevin Bacon. But he was a great sport that when we were finally had to explain to him that, like, you know, you have to actually get in there. And of course they give it to me to tell him and how, like, yeah, but you know, it can't actually come down because of whatever. And it's this whole thing. And he was like, well, it's not going to be on, is it? And I was like, no. And he was like, no, I don't care. And so he was great. But he had a blast doing it. And then, yeah, I think we did it twice. We did it once, which is what's in the movie. And the second take, we just used like the glass blowing, like inserts of things like that. But the first one, you know, we had it rigged so all the blood to come out, and it worked, and it was great. We put 3 cameras on it. It was really cool. So yeah, it was fun. Yeah, weird thing to do for an evening, but it was really fun. Yeah.
Right there in the
I was just to go back to Pearl. That ending scene was just like one of the coolest scenes I've seen in so long. With Mia just looking into the camera and just going through all these different emotions and making the audience feel for her and then feel uncomfortable. And I wonder even like if you can't explain like how you were able, or if it was you or if it was her, like pull that out of her as a director or her as an actress. Like how organic was that? How much was that you walking her through it? Like, are you actually, or people in the background, like actually telling her what to do at that time? It was just kind of like silenced out, or did you just say go? And she just went through that.
It's even less than everything you described. So basically what happened was, I knew that the way Pearl starts is she feeds the goose to the alligator and freeze frames, and it says Pearl. So I knew the last shot of the movie was going to be all this stuff happened, Howard comes home and she smiles and is trying to make the best of it. It was going to freeze frame and the credits were going to roll. And so I was setting up to do that shot, and I was like, hey, so the thing is, like, I want to do this. It's going to be a freeze frame of you with some demented smile on your face, trying to make the best of this weird situation. And I think that's a really cool ending for the movie. She was like, that sounds good. And I was like, the thing is, you know, to do a freeze frame, it's like ultimately in post, I'm going to just freeze it. But like, I was like, I'm going to let it go a little longer, because if you go, and I just assume I'm going to freeze it, but I needed another beat, I just got to let it roll, and I'll do the freeze frame later. So I was like, so don't, if it gets a little awkward, I'm going to let it go for a couple seconds or whatever. And she was like, okay, cool. But then I was like, well, actually, you know what, it might be a little while, because I was like, it might just be interesting to do sort of like an organic freeze frame and just kind of see what happens. And she was like, oh, okay. Now, I didn't think I was going to let it go for 2.5 minutes. I just thought, like, if it gets, but what happened was, it was like, action, okay, whatever, she smiles. And I was like, that's when I would freeze frame, let me give it an extra beat so I'm covered. Okay, right around now is probably enough, but it's kind of fun watching her smile. Let's see what happens. And then I was like, this is getting weird, let's see what happens. And then I could tell it was hard for her, and I was like, well, that's interesting. Let's see what happens. And I was just like, let's see if she ever breaks. Like, let's see if she goes, why are we still shooting this? But I already kind of warned her I was going to let it go a little bit. I was only going to let it go like 20 seconds. But like, it became interesting to see.
The evolution.
I was just going to be like, let's see if she taps out. And it just kept getting more interesting. And I could tell that part of it was her struggling to do it, and part of it was her also bringing her own kind of, what you're saying, she was going through all that stuff with it, and I could see that happening. And I was like, well, I'm not going to cut in the middle of that, because that's too great. And so that went on for about like 2.5 minutes, and I was like, I know I have enough now. And at that point, I was like, I know it must just be really hard, and also it would probably start to repeat itself after that. And so I eventually, once I had more than enough, cut, and then we did one take of it, and that was that. I just, as soon as we were done, I was like, that's the end of the movie. So it was a kind of improvisation thing, and it was just one of those weird things that I was like, this might be interesting, let's see what happens, and then it ended up being that.
That was actually going to be my follow-up. If that was just one take, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was one take. It was literally that. It was like, moving on. Yeah.
At the end of that, she's like, WTF, Ty, really? That long? And when she was like, what was going on? Or
I don't really
or did
know.
she
I don't
like,
think
all right,
she said.
done?
I think my guess is, and you have to ask her, but I think halfway through she probably knew
What was happening?
this was interesting. You know, because I think her going through all those emotions, I think was her going, he hasn't said cut yet. I'm gonna like let ride whatever starts to happen, and I'm gonna process the movie, and I'm gonna go through these emotions. And so I think by it still rolling, she just took the initiative to continue on with the character. And so no, I think I think when it was done, I don't think she was laughing, like whatever. I think she knew like something, we just did something cool.
Yeah.
So, but I don't really remember. But it was like, I
She
feel like
trusted
everyone
you.
else might have been like, what the fuck? But like, I think she was kind of like, something interesting happened there and I'm gonna move on to whatever's next. But like, we had that in our back pocket in a cool way.
Very cool. Yeah, she clearly trusted you. Like, well, he knows what he's doing. He hasn't stopped me yet, so I'm just going to do it.
Yeah, it was weird, but it turned.
And was that the last scene that you filmed? I mean,
No, we probably moved on to do something else after that. Yeah, I'm trying to think what the last thing we filmed in Pearl was. It might have been. No, that was early on. It would have been something in that house. I think it might have been the bathroom scene. I don't know. Maybe it'll come to me in the midst of this conversation. But it would have been because that was a set, so it would have been when we were on the stages. So it was somewhere in that world, but it was not that last shot.
thank you.
I saw a hand go up over here.
I was just gonna ask you about Maxine. Sorry,
Yeah.
Maxine keeps coming up. I love all your movies, but in Maxine, there's a scene in the Bates Motel, and I think it's so interesting because I don't know how you could possibly get permission to do that, and I just think it's so perfect that it ends up in the movie. And I was just wondering how you were able to make that happen.
Yeah, it was very similar to the Innkeeper's story I told you, where it was like I wrote it into the movie, and then thought, oof, if we can't go there, like this is a giant middle point of the movie. And the answer is we wrote a letter to the Hitchcock Foundation, and they said okay.
So
Like it was
awesome.
kind of that simple. So it was. I think they either say yes or no, and in our case they said yes. But yeah, because of how, for sort of the reasons of Psycho and it's in relation to Maxine and to horror movies and the sort of thematics of the movie, but also to what they talk about in X. I wrote it in because of what happened in X. I was like, oh, this is a funny, she can be on a back lot, this is a real location, this is a weird meta thing that can happen, and it's relating back to the movie. And then yeah, they said yes. I mean, so the story's not that good. It was like, I hope they say yes. They did. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking just because the thread, like some of the things that you talked about before, for this Q&A, like hearing about how like certain things kind of hinge on whether or not
Yeah.
it comes together, whether you get the Yankee Peddler or whatever. But like, I just think it's so cool. And I was like, I wonder if that was in the script, that was planned, because it is, to me, it just fits so well.
Yeah, that was the hope, and then
Yeah.
it was very surreal to shoot there and all that, so it was
That's
really
really
weird.
cool.
Yeah, it was a very weird thing to do.
So cool.
That was kind of I mean, Maxine was such a movie, they're all movies about movies in a way, but Maxine was such like an 80s, when you're in Hollywood, the artifice of Hollywood, so it was like leaning into all that was the fun of it.
Yeah.
I know you edited all 3 of the X movies as well, and I just wanted to know which one was the most challenging, which one was your favorite to edit, and was it intentionally keep them around hour 45 and stuff like that, like, 'cause they're all kind of around there?
I didn't think much about the running time, they just kind of ended up there. X was the hardest to edit by far. Pearl was the easiest to edit for no reason other than it just, I don't know, it was. X was hard because it was more characters and it was the movie within a movie thing, and so you find yourself in a, like, do you want to see this in the fake movie or do you want to see it in the real movie? So it's a can of worm of choices that are always there. So and also you have the one character playing 2 people, so that's kind of annoying. And so it was like just technically like that movie was a drag as far as doing that. The other ones not so much. I mean, Maxine was big, quite a bit got cut out of it. It wasn't necessarily that hard to edit. It was just it was like the movie was much bigger initially, but trying to like refine it, not just because it would have been too long at 2.5, I mean it would have been too long, but it was more like, okay, if you take this out, this doesn't make sense, so then that has to go. But if that goes, this doesn't make sense, so that has to go. But if that goes, then we got a giant problem. So how do I rearrange this to explain that? So it kind of became this like puzzle thing of figuring out how to like take something that was this big and make it this big and still have it have the integrity of what it once was. Pearl also had a lot get cut out, but it was like, it was there was a whole other day of story, and so it was just kind of like, well, if you cut before she goes to bed and cut after she wakes up, that's like it never happened. So that was a really easy edit from a technical standpoint. It was just, you take it out and no one knows anything otherwise. Maxine, it was kind of little things all over the place. And basically what happened is you kind of got the sense that if it wasn't relating to her and the Puritan 2 and getting back to the thing and she could lose her job, it wasn't not good, it just wasn't as good or as interesting because it was the third movie. even though you didn't know the story of Maxine, you had spent enough time in the world of these movies that it would wear out its welcome when it went too tangential, because you were kind of like, I am 3 movies into this, so I just want to know, is she going to make it or not? So when you kind of went off into the other storylines, it wasn't that it wasn't good, it just was that it was like, yeah, but I'm more interested in knowing what was happening back there. So for me, it kept being like, let's try to keep it getting back to that and make that be the sort of driving force of the. But the thing is that we put out these novelizations, and because I'm not a big fan of director's cuts, because they are the director's cuts. It's like, I didn't release something, they were the best versions. They would not be better with all that stuff back in. It'd be cool to see that stuff, but it's not a better movie with that stuff in. And then to do deleted scenes, I think is kind of a bummer, because the scenes never really get their full attention, because you kind of abandon them before you finish them. So then you're seeing this real rough version of this scene that doesn't really let it be on its feet to the best of its ability. So we did these novelizations, and I had them go back to the scripts when they did those. So the X one is pretty similar, because not very much got cut out of there. But Pearl and Maxine have all of the missing stuff in the novelization, so those kind of act as the director's cuts.
Are there any plans for a Uber boutique release of the Roost?
I don't know if it's Uber Boutique. I do know that the rights have reverted back to Glass Eye Pix, which has been, I don't know, a long time coming. So I do think that they now own it again, and there is a desire to put together something for it. I don't know any more details than that. I do know that Larry did email me like a few months ago and was like, hey, I got the Roost and Trigger Man back, like we should do something with these. So that requires us not being lazy about it. So it could happen very soon, or it could be a slow burn, as people say. So we'll see. But yes, ultimately, like, those rights are now reverted back to the people that it started with. And so if we can figure out a cool thing to do, I'm sure we'll do it.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask about the sacrament, because I'm really interested in cult stuff, so that movie definitely strikes a chord with me. And I was just curious about where it came from, if it had maybe initially started in sort of that documentary style, or if it maybe like evolved from that, from like something else, just because there's obviously, there's Jonestown in there and things like that. So I was just curious if it had maybe started as maybe like a more straightforward retelling, or if you decided while the process went, if it had sort of evolved into something different over time.
Well, I've always been very fascinated with Jonestown, and sort of, that would be a really interesting, someone should make a really great definitive movie about that, which is hard to do. Certainly at that time in my life, no one was it was not gonna happen for me. Like, no one, that needs to be done in a very thorough and like effective and large scale way to do that properly. But I'd always been interested in that, and I had made The Innkeepers, and The Innkeepers is a really lighthearted movie. And so I didn't want to repeat myself, so I wanted to make something that was much more realistic and more like confrontational. And like, especially when you come to something like this, there are movies such as, say, like Terrifier or something, where like you cheer when somebody gets cut in half. Then there are movies in which like you don't want to look when somebody gets cut in half, and it's a different vibe. So I was like, okay, the next thing I want to do is not something, say, like Terrifier, but it's also not something like The Innkeepers. I want to do something that was like, even if you're like cheering for, getting cut in half in Terrifier, you're a little bit like, yeah, but dude, in Sacrament, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the vibe I wanted to go with, is a more confrontational violence. It's neither better nor worse in movies, it's just a different thing. And so, at the same time, there was, at the time, Vice Magazine had sort of really had all these really interesting, immersive, journalistic, they would go to weird places and do weird journalism stories. And it was part of the vibe of what they were doing was like, this could go wrong at any moment, was really part of the like excitement of watching those and the anxiety of watching those. And it was a really interesting thing, because they were like bringing you sort of stories from parts of the world that were like, whoa, this feels real dicey for you to be there. And that was like in my mind at the time, and that reminded me of sort of what happened in Jonestown, because it was sort of the congressman and the media's visit that really popped everything off. And I thought, like, that is what you're worried about in all of these Vice things. And so I thought, I was like, well, what's the modern version of something like modern technology journalism hitting with, and that's kind of where the idea came from. And Eli Roth happened to be making some like kind of found footagey movies at the time. And I was like, oh, I had this idea to do this kind of weird, it's semantics, but not found footage, but fake documentary. Like, and he was like, oh, well, we would do that because we're doing things like that. And so I wrote a script, and then they said yes, and we went off to make that movie. And so it was partially a desire to do something that mixed like history and fiction in a weird way, and something that would kind of play on the media's role or non-role in a horror situation like this, and then really from a stylistic horror director standpoint to kind of make a movie that the violence in it was like not fun, that the violence kind of like had the weight of what real violence has, which is like not enjoyable. You know, it's sort of like Terrifier is enjoyable, that in real life not enjoyable. You know, and so like that was kind of like to, you know, and then as soon as I finished that, I was like, now I want to go the complete opposite direction again. And that's typically how I roll, is like I want to try to change it up as much as I can, because making a movie is like 2 years of your life. And a lot of times if you make a really serious movie, you're committing to a really kind of like bummer vibe for like 2 years of your life, which is not always that appealing. So sometimes when you're done that, you want to like, you know, at least for me, I'm like, all right, let's have some laughs again. So.
Speaking of that, like switching up the vibes, what do you have coming next? What's your next thing that you want to talk about? Do you have anything you can share with us?
No, I have a thing. I'm pretty sure I know what's next. It may be in the fall, maybe top of next year. I mean, it's pretty much, I know what it is. It's just a matter of like, I made 3 movies at the same time. That was very exhausting. I had a kid at the same time. It's been like a really busy 4 years. And so it's, I'm not in a huge hurry. I'm not gonna wait that long, but I'm sort of enjoying the calm before the storm, because like I said, it is 2 years of my life. So whatever, once I start going down the road on the next thing, that's what it is. It's not going to be anything like the last 3 movies, so it's a different thing. So, so we'll see. But there's 2 things. There'll be one of those 2 most likely. They both seem doable and they both seem likely. It's just more like, when do I, you know, make it my full priority? So certainly not before the fall.
I saw a hand shoot up right back there in the back. You? Yeah.
So growing up, I watched a lot of westerns with my grandfather, and I was just wondering, is that a genre that you were into? Is like, how did Valley Violence show up for you? That switch.
Yeah, after The Sacrament, I wanted to kind of do something, because Sacrament was this sort of like fake documentary realism thing, and so I wanted to make something that was like really traditionally cinematic. And I had made so many horror movies at that point, I didn't have a huge desire to make another horror movie, and I really didn't for 10 years after that, because it was like, I didn't want to repeat myself. So I was like, okay, what's a really traditionally cinematic genre? And for me, certainly like in America, like the Western is that. Like it's like movie, you know? And so that's what I wanted to do, is like not something realistic. I wanted to do something that was like really traditionally cinematic. And so I had the idea for that movie, and I sort of pitched it, and then that actually got made really quickly. And so I always have been, still am, would love to do another one. It was a great experience doing it. And yeah, it's a really fun genre to be a part of. And it is traditionally like, in the same way Pearl is like traditional movie making in that regard. Like it's not, it's enjoyable to just sort of like make like cinema, if you will. And that's kind of what it was felt like making that. Even though that movie has like a sense of humor to it, which was a big thing coming off The Sacrament, is to try to make something about a bunch of like idiots like bumping into one another and causing all these problems. It still had this very like, you know, big wide shots of vistas and things like that.
Do we have any in this section, in the back?
Have you ever Googled yourself? And if so, what's the worst thing you ever found when you Googled yourself?
I'm sure I have. I certainly probably have over the years when a movie comes out, and the worst thing I can probably think is people probably being like, "This is the worst movie I've ever seen in my life." That's not that big of a deal. But like, I guess that's, you know, I don't have nothing particularly scandalous on the internet. I mean, I got shot in the head with an arrow in a movie once, and that's about it.
Were you inspired by Giallo at all for Maxine?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. One last question to wrap us up. You've done so much, as we talked about in the beginning, in all aspects of the industry. Is there something in the industry that you haven't done yet that you would like to?
Oh yeah, there's tons of stuff. I mean, I didn't make a horror movie for 10 years because I had made so many horror movies that I was like, I don't have much left to say in that for a while. And then it had been 10 years had gone by, and I was like, I never made a slasher movie. Nobody seems to be making slasher movies. Horror movies have gotten really soft, in my opinion. Okay, I have an idea for like a new slasher kind of thing, and that's kind of where X came from. And then that turned into 3 movies out of nowhere. And so I have maybe, I'll be more dramatic. I have at least one more horror movie. We'll see how many more. But I have one more that I feel inspired to do. Whether it's next or not, I'm not sure. But otherwise, you know, I've made so many horror movies that it's not something that I'd like to make other things, because like I said, repeating yourself when you spend 2 years of your life doing it. It's like, I know how to, like, it was fun to crush Kevin Bacon in a car crusher, because I was like, I've never, that feels like I haven't done that, and that feels like its own. But now if I was to make some like gritty city movies, like, well, I've done that. So like, I could up the ante, I suppose, but now I'm just like upping the ante from a technical aspect for me. So that's not that fun for me, you know. And so it's, to me, it's like about doing something that I'm not sure I know how to do, and like, or like I think I know how to do it, but I have to do it to prove it, you know. Like that's kind of what makes me want to go through the 2 years of making the movie. So I have, what I've never really made in horror that I have maybe up my sleeve is I've never tried to make a horror movie that's like sole goal is to just be very, very scary. Most of my movies are a part of my personality and a little bit of not silliness, but a lot of times the characters clumsily run into the concept of the movie. And that's for partially because I like that, and partially because I think that's more entertaining and that's my own interest and all these things. But I've never really, well, like, no, this is like if you make The Exorcist or something, like that's not a fun movie. Like that's really like a heavy movie, and your goal every morning is to make something like brutally heavy so that people really emotionally relate to the heaviness of that. You have to really want to do that to live in that headspace for that long. And I've never really wanted to do that, but part of me is like, maybe I got one of those, you know. And so, since I've never done that before, I would say like hang it up in horror. I would certainly want to at least make one of those.
Amazing. Mr. West, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.